Hello, welcome to the Tomosi Business Training Series. Thank you for joining us once again. Have you subscribed to our social media handles? Remember, this podcast is aired on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Enjoy!
So today in this detour I made, out of the 7 levels of competitiveness, I want to share with you 3 ways to deal with dogma and from a Christian perspective. So from a Christian point of view, I invite you to take a second look, because in Uganda we are religious people, so I ask you to take a second look at the term in the Bible we call Egypt or Misri in Luganda and other languages. The term we call Misri among the Hebrew community is Mezraim. Mezraim. In Acholi, they call it Diongat or Gino Mo Wek Pe Ochit or Time. So I speak to you in Uganda always, but I want you to listen to my Luo. So the Hebrew word for Egypt or Mizraim is not a physical place. It is a spiritual place. It is an economic, mental, and emotional state or condition for one to be in. It is an expression of constraints and failure, simply because of the conditions acting on you from a social and economic point of view, and you simply want to follow the rest of the herd for solutions. To start a business, to nurture it, to fail and stand again, to understand the rules, to talk to people that you would rather not have time to talk to keep in that business is akin to a strong and stable marriage. Remember where I started with those 2 things, business and marriage. It requires faith. It requires persistence. It requires courage. It requires all these things to leave the conditions that are bothering you and you create better ones. And for you to do that, you require deep thinking and not giving up. So I invite you to look again, those of you who have time, at the book of Exodus in the chapter number 12 and see an example of courage against pervasive culture, just like those 3 scientists in our times that I mentioned earlier. These Hebrews, in that reading that I mentioned in chapter 12 of Exodus, really began killing and roasting sheep, which was a god, small g, in Mizraim. So in Misri, they worshipped sheep as God. And these Hebrews woke up one day and they began killing and roasting them. The sheep god was called Kunum. Kunum is K-H-U-N-U-M. Now when you see the ancient texts, the sheep god called Kunum is represented in the hagiographic writing by a ram with horizontal twisting horns. This god was from the first dynasty, some 3,000 years BC. So I just want you to imagine, one Saturday afternoon, you are an Egyptian living at that time, and all your Hebrew neighbors in the ancient city of Pithom, where you live in the northeastern part of the Egyptian delta, a city which the Hebrews had built for Pharaoh Ramses, these people, your neighbors, wake up and they are roasting your god sheep. What? You would ask. All the sheep you hear are now bleating across the hills and valleys because of the knives killing them. The aroma of roasted meat in the air, the whiff across the neighborhood. These people are preparing to leave the slave conditions, Mizraim, and they are taking the action of killing your culture totems and your gods, and they are not worried that they could land in trouble. That requires courage to challenge the status quo. Sometimes you have to take a stand that isn't normal, but because you want to challenge the central dogma, you take those actions. So this is one way of challenging central dogma. Courage, take actions, even if those actions would land you in trouble, but they are actions that are important for your life. The second way to challenge an orthodoxy, or what I call a central dogma, is to clearly see through the spirit of the times, and you understand the spirit of the times before you can help others to deal with it. The Germans call this Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist. This is where you get your word ghost or spirit in English. Zeitgeist is described, and I quote, the defining mood of a particular period of history as shown by the beliefs and ideas of the time, close quote. In Luo, we call this term padano mekare moni. What is the defining mood of your time, you as a young person? That business is collapsing, that there is failure of governance, that corruption has increased, that we have lost a sense of honesty and integrity, that we cannot organize ourselves to compete on the global market. More and more and more allegations, more and more mood to really put you down to never start or do anything, whether it's business or marriage. Now, not all is going wrong in your country, and even if it did, that is no excuse for you to not do the right thing for yourself and for your country. The true zeitgeist, or the mood of the day, should recognize that you have a free will as a young person, that you can bring light to your families, that you can start and finish projects, that you can grow a business, and you can stay married for the rest of your life by God's grace. Both business and marriage are the coming together of two people who, working hard at what God has given them, produce excellent results for their community and for their country. I say these things because I saw this with my own parents, who have long passed on. They had no formal education, but they worked very hard at every little thing God gave them, and they multiplied it. It is this very foundation that my wife and I, and I'm glad I'm doing this podcast at home, we work from that foundation, and we hope to pass it on to the children. Hard work, persistence, and faith. We should search as young people for meaning in whatever we are trying to do, and nobody should force you to conform. Do not take your personal agency, which God gave you, for granted, because you lose initiative by simply conforming. This was the second way to deal with central prevailing dogma. I call it zeitgeist. Finally, if Mizraim, which we said is Misri, seems to stick around you far too long, and if the zeitgeist of the time is that you might fall if you walk outside of the mood of the times, if the cacophony of noises around you from your peers is such that it stops you in your tracks and you don't go where you want to go, you need another mindset. And the Hebrew have a good word for this too. It is chesed. Chesed. K-H-E-S-S-E-D. Chesed. They actually call this ma kicha ikom dano moken. The best description for me is the difference between the words grace and mercy. Grace and mercy. The words religious people tend to use. Even us, when we pray, we use these words quite a lot. Mercy is when you make a mistake. Say, a traffic offense, you are caught over speeding, and you are supposed to pay a fine. But a police officer stops you, comes to your window and says, hey, you made a mistake. Please don't repeat it. Go in peace. The officer has been merciful to you. That's mercy. However, grace is you have made a mistake, you have messed up. But you have not just been only forgiven. Instead, the police officer takes a notebook, issues an arrest warrant, then he suddenly turns around and forgives you instantly. And what more? He takes money from his own pocket, his own wallet. He pays the fine for you. He gives you proof of payment. He tells you to go home in peace. You will never forget such an incident. It will stay with you. What's the point of all this? The point of all this is that chesed, or grace and mercy, combined for each of us when we make mistakes, We must not torture our minds and emotions when we have failed many times. We must never close off businesses forever because we have failed. Doesn't matter how many times. We must instead pick the lessons from those failures and keep moving. Why? Because there is mercy and enough grace for each of us who are trying to do the right things, even if this is amidst Mizraim and bad zeitgeist. I hope you remember those three words. Mizraim, constraint. Zeitgeist, prevailing mood that keeps you down or up. Chesed, there is always grace and mercy for the next day. Thank you and have a great weekend.
Would like to hear from you. Please email us at info@tapmedia.com and visit our website at www.tapmedia.com. You can also visit our offices located at Tomosi Business Park, Luzira, Port Bell Road, or call 0414 220 702. Thank you.